last stretch. We wanted to take a few minutes, and Anna mentioned this morning the Journal of Borderland Studies, but there are also other venues where publication can be fruitful. So I would like to introduce my friend Benjamin Perrier, coming from the West, the Great West, from the far West, and the University of Victoria. He's a postdoc researcher there, but has many hats while working with the group Borders in Globalization, Borders in the 21st Century. So I'll let him talk about that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So hello everyone, I'm Ben Perrier. I'm a researcher with the Borders in Globalization Lab at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. I'm working with Emmanuel Brunet-Jailly, who unfortunately couldn't make it to Montreal. I would like to thank Elizabeth and Marie and all the team for this perfect and great organization. It's a great pleasure to be with you. So today I'm going to introduce quickly the Borders in Globalization program in my 10 minutes time. So what is Borders in Globalization? It's a program created and developed by Emmanuel Brunet-Jailly since 2013, and he has taken two phases. One phase from 2013 to 2021, it was BIG1, Borders in Globalization 1, and since 2022, a second phase of Borders in Globalization, divided in two pillars. So my outline today, I will present quickly the Borders in Globalization Phase 2. I will present the Borders in Globalization Review, and I will present also some podcasts. And I will speak in conclusion about an article with Emmanuel we are trying to finish about borders as zones of common law. So Borders in Globalization program is funded by SSHRC, the Social Science and Humanities Research Councils, with a partnership with Erasmus+, and in this room we have a lot of university partners with Dhananjay, with Irasema, with Elizabeth. So it's a consortium of 13 university and think tank who are working together to develop the knowledge of borders and cross-border studies, with a specific focus on the concept of functional borders and functional borderings, and aterritorial borders and aterritorial borderings, and also non-state borderings and non-state borders. That's the concept, the main idea of what is Borders in Globalization. So the phase 2 of Borders in Globalization is divided in two pillars. The pillars 1 is focused on the territoriality and the counter-territoriality of borders. That was the phase 1, developed for the 7 years, with specific focus on governance in sustainability, in cross-border institutionalization in Europe, and also with security. That was the phase 1. The phase 2 is divided in two pillars, with a strong pillar 1 based on indigenous-hood nationalism and resurgence. We are working with a lot of First Nations and a lot of experts in First Nations who are also First Nation with their identity of First Nation or American tribes. And this pillar 1 is managed by Jeff Contasel, who is the Cherokee, who is a member of the Cherokee Nation in the United States. So with Borders in Globalization, we have developed since 2018 a big journal, which focuses on different dimensions of borders and which opens his research with art and poetry. That's a very important piece of the Borders in Globalization review. That's the dimension of art, poetry, and also the First Nation and indigenous dimension. So as you could see on the screen, the content of this Borders in Globalization review is divided on articles, essays, research notes, policy reports. We have also film review, book reviews, and as I mentioned earlier, the artwork piece, photography, painting, poetry, and you could read a poem right now. As the content in the artwork, we have a lot of articles focused on photography and of art, and I have Pamela Dodds, who is on the room today, who has been published a beautiful portfolio about borders in the specific technique in the 2000, I think it was the Borders in Globalization review in 2023. So thank you, Pamela, to be here and to have shared your art with Borders in Globalization Review.
And actually, if I may, you showed your work in 2022 at the previous editions. We had her first.
Yeah, you were. What did you say? She was first with you?
Yeah. That's what I said.
You're pioneers.
Yes.
So in parallel with the Borders in Globalization Review, we developed the Borders in Globalization podcast. I managed and I'm interviewing some people, some experts on borders through this podcast. And I covered a lot of different fields of the social science. I covered with Frédéric Béraud, it's the legal aspect of European Union and the borders. With David Breeze, and I connect the dots with today, with David Breeze. I interviewed David Breeze. David Breeze is an archaeologist, specialist in the borders of Roman empires. And of course, he's a specialist of Hadrian Walls and Antonine Walls. So it was very interesting to have David Breeze, who is an eminent scholar in archaeology of borders and of border walls. So if you want to listen to the podcast, go on the website or on YouTube. You will have a sense of the analysis of David Breeze. We have two podcasts in Borders in Globalization. We have the podcast I am interviewing some expert, and we have another podcast managed by Jeff Contasel with the title of Frontlines Are Everywhere. In this podcast, Jeff is interviewing militant First Nation tribes, elected chief, artists, all part of members of the First Nations. So it's a very interesting podcast which gives voices for the First Nation in Canada and around the world. I would like to conclude to share with you an article we are writing with Emmanuel Brunet-Jailly. The concept of this article is to defend the idea of borders are zones of common law. Borders are not only separations, but borders are not only lines, but borders are spaces of cooperations. That's the idea we are trying to defend in this article. And to understand the complexity, when you create borders, when you think borders as a common law, you need to understand, you need to mobilize different branches of law and different sources of law. You need to be able to manage the international public law with the European Union law, with the national union law, like constitutional and administrative law. So it's a bench, it's a meeting place with different systems of law, with different regimes of law, and we need to overcome, to transcend the difficulties to manage this pluralism of law in order to think, in order to realize a transboundary spaces. A transboundary spaces will be always a mix of these relations between these different legal orders and these different legal regimes. That's the idea of the article we are trying to focus on and to try to finish before the summer, because Emmanuel Brunet-Jailly is also defending this article in London in 1 month with David Newman. So to conclude, Borders in Globalization Lab represent a niche in the study of borders. We study the transformation of the legal and political regimes of the territorial borders. We explore the new forms of borders focused on the functional dimension, focused on the dimension of the aterritoriality of borders, on non-state dimension, and in general, the regulatory borders, which could be terminating at the line, but of course, which transcends all the border lines. So last word, visit our website, listen our podcast, watch our webinars, read our reviews, and propose your articles and propose other subject of discussion. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So I will call the last panel on stage.
Okay, good afternoon. This is notoriously the most difficult session in conferences because it's after lunch. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing our last panel. We are going to have Dhananjay Tripathi from South Asian University, New Delhi, who is going to speak on mental borders, the story behind border walls in South Asia. And Dhananjay will be followed by James Scott from the Karelian Institute of the University of Eastern Finland, who is going to talk about the fear factor, border walls, anxiety, and psychosis. And finally, Rafael Luécano from Chapman University, Orange, the turning of America, the US-Mexico border wall. Dhananjay, so I think each speaker has 10 minutes, and Dhananjay, the floor is yours.
Before I start, I must thank Elizabeth for giving us this opportunity to be here. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a very well-organized conference and a lot of learning in last 2 days. Today, when I'm speaking, there's a war-like situation in South Asia between India and Pakistan, and some of my work is related to it. Like, what is so complicated between India and Pakistan? Why we have failed to make our relation good. And I call it not merely the border issue, but there are mental borders in South Asia. And what is mental borders? We know that borders are, by definition, it's to divide. But what is mental borders? Because and I draw a lot from a lot of we have already discussed. I think I can skip that, but we believe, border studies scholars believe that borders are not only real lines, but they're also very symbolic. And what is so symbolic about borders? Because one of the main functions, what David Newman call functions of border, is to othering, is to separate, is to create a kind of a difference between us and them. And how this border really functions in terms of citizenship, religion, ethnicity, language, etc. A lot of people believe, particularly the political scientists, that nation-state brings us together, but there are an alternative view from a constructive point of view, and that is given by Benedict Anderson, and he says that nations are also imagined communities. How we imagine ourselves that we are Indian, we are French, we are Canadian, and that's a very important part as far as the South Asia is concerned. So what about the borders in South Asia? I call it as a lines of irrationality. And why it's a line of irrationality? Because most of the borders in South Asia are made by the British. It is not by the South Asians. And if you look at some of the names of South Asian borders, it is known as Redcliffe Line, McMahon Line, Durand Line. These are not the South Asian names. These are very British name. And when they have drawn the borders in South Asia, it was not for the South Asians, it was for their own administrative convenience, it was to overcome their security anxiety. So the problem that one see in a Pakistan-Afghanistan border is because of the Durand Line, and Durand Line has divided Pashtuns into two different countries, one nation to two different countries, and the problem continues. 1905, Bengal was divided in India, and the reason given by the British is that administrative convenience, but we know it was to divide the freedom struggle on the communal lines. So what happened in South Asia? Because of these irrational lines of irrationality, we have created a lot of mental borders in our minds, and we don't believe that these are real lines, but an artificial line, but we have accepted it. Nobody has challenged it even after British left this region. And what happened, that some of these borders were created with a lot of bloodshed and violence. So if you look at between India and Pakistan, almost like 15 million people got displaced. In the human history, the biggest example of migration, forced migration. And they were there, and one fine morning, they became a citizen of two different countries. Similarly, between Bangladesh, there was a lot of violence, the stories of like how people were killed, butchered, and massacred. But this has not stopped with this partition. A partition continued, and what we call as everyday partition in South Asia. So it's not like one partition, but on a daily basis we see this partition. And who create this partition? Professor Sanjay Chaturvedi, who works on this issue, he calls that the heart and soul of people got partitioned, and how that had happened. And let me come, I will come to that, like how heart and soul got partitioned. But coming to the border wall and what I call as mental wall in South Asia, Elizabeth has already pointed out that globalization has not helped us. More walls have came up. And Victor Conrad has also said that walls are real and virtual, and how these virtual walls actually work in South Asia. Because if you look at South Asia, India and Pakistan, if I meet a Pakistani, I can talk the same language, we can enjoy the same food, same music. But when it comes to nationality, we are enemies of each other. And that's a very peculiar thing about South Asia. Means I have been to different European countries, they have different languages, different kind of food. But that is not true about South Asia. You can go from one South Asian country to another. It is almost the same. So in order to defend the nationality or territoriality, we started creating a mental wall in South Asia. And what is this mental wall? Because socially and culturally people share so much with each other across border, yet they remain politically divided. And who divide us is the political task of people who were in power in these different countries. And if you look at South Asia, it's very interesting. India actually shares border with almost all the countries in South Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, with Nepal. And if you take at maritime borders with Maldives, with Sri Lanka, except for Afghanistan, India shares border with all the South Asian countries. And you know, when India shares border with all the South Asian countries, every South Asian country have to explain that why they are not India. Means how they are very different from India. And that's again, because culturally that is not possible. India and Bangladesh also share the language. It's a Bengali language. India and Sri Lanka shares the kind of a language like Tamil, the food. India, Bhutan also have a lot of cultural connections. So every state has to define, has to convince the people that how they are different from India. And that is why they keep creating these walls. So how these walls are being created? Through political narratives, through media, through text, through school textbooks, etc. And I have done some very interesting research on India-Pakistan textbook. And if you read the Pakistani textbook, you will find that, and these are some of the points, I don't have much time, but these are some of the points which I believe that how these walls are being created through movies. There are a lot of war movies that you find in South Asia. There's a lot of glorification of war, hyper-nationalism. Masculinity is very important, like how we have to be very tough with our enemies. There's a hate and enmity that has been developed every time when you see. And textbook is one of the very important mediums in South Asia. Interestingly, South Asia is so connected, but if you read the textbooks of South Asian countries, you don't find the mention of South Asia in it. That's very amazing. And if you read at the Pakistani textbook, Pakistani scholars have written a book which calls it a murder of history. The way the division is being shown that Pakistan is not close to South Asia, Pakistan is close to West Asia. And right now we see a wave of Hindutva in India also, where Muslims are being projected as others. So a very interesting kind of things are going on in subcontinent right now. There are other mediums between India and Nepal. There's so much of similarity. We have open borders, no visa, etc. But recently what Nepal has done, they have printed their map in a currency note, you know. So it's also like popularizing or taking it to a level of conflict. Not in a simple way, but if everybody look at the currency note on a daily basis, they think that this is our real border, and it is becoming controversial with India. There's India-Bangladesh. It's the largest fencing in the world. Almost like 3,000 kilometers has already been fenced. Some part is still left, but 3,000 kilometers has been fenced. What are the cost of this? You know, South Asia, despite our cultural similarity, it's the least integrated region in the world. our trade potential is like 67%. We do trade of only 23 billion, and we are a poor region, by the way. Let me give this figure by the World Bank. It's easier for South Asian to actually trade with Brazil than with the next door neighbor, 20% higher. And why this? Why we are carrying this kind of a division or cultural disconnect? Because in a local language, we don't call it partition, we call it batwara. And batwara is a term that has been used for partition between blood brothers or cousins. So that kind of enmity we always carry for each other. India, Pakistan has done, recently they have opened a Kartarpur corridor, which the Indian Prime Minister Modi has said is like a fall of a Berlin Wall. So what had happened that people who got partition in these two countries have not met for 70 years, they got a chance to meet at this Kartarpur corridor. And there are a lot of stories of it, like how people got divided during the partition, and they met almost like 70 years after that. What should be the agenda for border studies in South Asia? I think it's very important that we should talk of debordering in South Asia. And for what? For trade, for cultural region, for political reasons. And in all of it, the role of India is very important. As I said, India shares border with almost all the South Asian countries. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dhananjay. Next is James. With
I had this guy.
So the fear factor, border walls, anxiety, and psychosis.
Very good to be here. Back in Montreal, this is, I think, my fourth, fifth time. And let's see, just waiting for my presentation, which follows basically on a lot of what was said in the last panel about the impacts of borders, border walls within countries, not just, projected outside. And here I'm trying to make a link between the social aspect of borders, social border making, and their political salience. And here you can see in this picture that I took, this guy it's for him, it's a real identity issue. Real men defend America and we secure our borders. And I think, but at the same time, I would also question this guy's mental health. Excuse me if I'm being a little bit condescending here, but I think it kind of missing some issues. My own research interest is very much pushed by what's happening in Europe in terms of the geographic divisions that are very much visible in voting patterns and regional divisions, urban, rural divisions, in terms of voting patterns for, let's say, traditional parties and the right wing and the extreme right wing. And usually these cleavages have, very interesting backgrounds, and some of them have a lot of historical backgrounds, divisions between traditional and cosmopolitan thinking. You could call it that, and then other kinds of divisions which are being which manifest themselves. And I was thinking that maybe perhaps there is an issue of mental perception of threat, anxiety, that is also playing a big role here. And this is something that I find quite intriguing. The fear factor, anxiety as kind of one of the major rationales for supporting borders. And it's something that we all do, actually. It's not something that's just Trump or right-wing people. I think it's a kind of it's one of these instincts that we tend to do when we're threatened, when we're stressed, is to kind of close ourselves in, when we actually should be doing the opposite. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that walls are not only about keeping people out and regulating mobility, but as Paulina Echoa Espejo says, they are also political message meant for domestic consumption. So Trump's border wall was perhaps one of the main rationales behind it was a message for liberal America that this is the future of our nation. And what are you liberals going to say about this wall? But I would also argue that are even wider, and I'm reading this because of the 10-minute restriction, even wider domestic ramifications involved. And they say a lot about the state of affairs within states. As Dhananjay has been talking about what's going on in Southeast Asia. There's something strange going on that is creating this impulse for bordering. Inner social and political divisions and polarization can be linked to support for walling, fencing, closing borders. So the more divided a society is, the less secure it is, and the more it needs walls. I think this is, so we're not getting more security in the United States by the border walls, we're getting less. As we heard in the last panel, we're getting less security and more violence. Moreover, the domestic significance and impact of border walls, even if often indirect, can be related to senses of anxiety, social stress, and ontological insecurities. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. So my research objective is to investigate how social borders are implicated in support for restrictive border policies, border politics, and walling. Moreover, understanding how social borders and well-being, senses of insecurity are linked. If you feel good about yourself and your future, you generally speaking, have a much more positive attitude toward the rest of the world, to say it in kind of rather blunt terms. One root of the problem lies in processes of perceived disruption that question existing senses of order and threaten senses of identity and well-being. So a sense of alienation and anxiety not only among economically and socially disenchanted or stressed members of society. So it's not just about economic or perceived economic deprivation, because sometimes even wealthy people tend to fall into this trap. So I want to make that point clear. Ontological insecurity feeds exclusionary social bordering practices, and it's also a question of mental states. Ontological insecurity is about physical well-being, but mental well-being and a sense of stable identity. And this is something that I think is a key issue in terms of social border making, in making these distinctions between us and them, there and here, and what is perceived as safe and what is perceived as dangerous. And I think these things kind of hang together. Moreover, I will not deny the fact that neoliberalism, anxiety, and stress do interact with myriad factors in creating support for border closures. Border walls, as well as punitive and vindictive actions against migrants and refugees. And I said, this is not something that's just, it's not something that's only Trump is doing. This is a rather widespread practice. So here, just briefly, some myriad pieces of evidence. And I know I'm not making any attempt to create like an overarching explanatory framework, but there's a lot of research out there that I'm trying to link to the border studies community that is talking about issues of mental health, well-being, and a sense of security, and how that relates to political behaviors like voting patterns, as well as support for borders, support for restrictive borders, let's say. And in fact, it's quite a lot of information out there. And just briefly, and this is not just pertaining to the United States. This is also something that's very much a case in the European situation. And the links between discontent and economic hardship are complex and involve a sense of disruption and ontological insecurity. The big discussion in Europe about the places that don't count, left behind places, and their political impacts and their support for the extreme right wing. Bandy Lee basically said that Trump's rise to power is based on a loss of middle-class status and wealth and a subsequent rise in poor collective mental health. That's a pretty tough statement. Another piece of evidence is that loneliness and perceived economic deprivation are related. They have political implications. People close themselves off. Richard Florida, a famous geographer who, the culture class and all that, dissatisfaction with the politics and the political culture of post-industrial society leads people to vote against their own economic interests, which with this last election is just a brilliant example of that. People are going to really see what kind of when the cat comes out of the bag. Furthermore, and this is another argument which is a long-standing one, white aggrievement, politics of agreement is widespread, and this is aimed at maintaining a white socio-political hegemony. Now, these are different strands of argumentation. They're not necessarily linked, there's no causal link between them, but these are, let's say, bits of evidence that point to how a sense of well-being, a sense of identity and stability feeds into political behaviors that can either favor openness or vindictive, restrictive border policies. and have implications in terms of voting patterns. Here again, a lot of research was done about COVID, and politics is making us sick. Mental health and anxiety are linked to voting patterns. Polarization is a serious, if largely overlooked, determinant of health. And here, for example, in terms of COVID, the people who are willing to mask, vaccinate, and the correlation between them and Trump, voting for Trump, it's quite stark, the parallels here. I don't want to kind of belabor the point because of the time constraints, but this is my final slide. So what are the kind of the research questions and challenges I'm up against or trying to explore here? And I would say that there's a lot of evidence out there that has to be maybe put together, not in some kind of a universal explanatory framework, but some kind of putting together evidence that is linked. That's suggesting there are mutually reinforcing impacts of social bordering in terms of polarization, division, resentment, and conditions of well-being. And that these are impactful in terms of when we think about border politics. Can we speak of walling psychosis as a wider symptom of general ontological insecurity, globally speaking? Where do these considerations lead us? What do we do with this information? We know that walling is counterproductive, and this is what a lot of people in the medical community are telling us. When we're worried, we have an instinct to isolate ourselves. But this is exactly the point where we have to reach out, connect to others. APA, the American Psychological Association, the need to belong is a powerful and highly emotional force, but political divisions limit our ability to connect. They damage personal relationships, and they also affect countries under stress. So the ontological security approach that I've mentioned here recognizes the need for social boundaries, definitely, and the ability to identify them. But at the same time, you need adaptive change, the ability to adapt to change and to shift borders in order to accommodate shifts in the environment. You have to be able to negotiate new borders, new border lines, keep them open in order to thrive. This is almost like a law of evolution. My final slide from David Hockney. Less is known that people think, and here as a geographer and the future, well, who knows where we're going there. We've been speculating a lot about what these last few months mean in terms of the course of border studies and also our own general existence here on the planet. And let's see. Waiting for the next conference, the next conference in Fez, maybe we'll know more. Okay, thank you. Or not.
Thank you very much, James. Last is Rafael Luécano,
okay.
Who is going to talk about the turning of America, the US-Mexico border wall.
Hello, everyone. I'm the last speaker of the conference, and so I don't know if I'm leftovers or dessert. And I have no PowerPoint. I wrote a paper, and I'm just going to give the kernel argument of the paper for this presentation. I also am not a social scientist, unlike most of you. I am a religious studies professor and a theologian. And so what I'm interested in this paper is the psyche and the soul of America and a fundamental shift that has taken place. And the argument is that I understand that there's been a fundamental shift in the narrative of the United States as manifested in the architectural construction of a border wall. And also, finally, I want to say that there must always be a narrative. And so I'm tracking the shift of this American narrative. Lastly, I lived in El Paso and watched Juarez from across outside my window, and I watched them build the border wall, and I wondered if they were building the wall to keep people out or to keep America in. The title of my paper is The Turning of America. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. In 1893, Harvard historian Frederick Jackson Turner authored his seminal essay, The Significance of the Frontier in American History. In his brief treatise, Turner gazed back at America's conquering of a continent. He captured how the frontier experience shaped America as a nation and melted immigrant peoples together with a singular and much-spirited identity as Americans. Turner's lively articulation of the American frontier so enraptured America that the very notion itself has continued to fuel America's compelling impulse of forward expansion. Yet I believe that Turner's key catchphrase is his specific reference to America's expansionism as an impulse of restless, nervous energy. Turner pointed out that the geographical frontier line had closed, that there was no more western edge to expand. Accordingly, he used the frontier in such a way that transcended geography and ascended to a fluid, theoretical significance. From one generation to the next, scholars, journalists, frontiersmen and women, senators and presidents bent and flexed the frontier expansionistic construction to their own distinctive uses. From the building of the interstate highways to America's walking on the moon. Ultimately, the frontier thesis was embraced as the ethos and the enduring vision of our nation. Plasticity has allowed the frontier thesis vivacity and longevity in the American consciousness. Yet Turner essay reads less as an academic exposition than an anthem lauding the rough and ready American spirit. And once Turner professed the American credo of a land of boundless expansion, America's mighty venture, now articulated, the notion of expansion took on a power of its own. Today, the chronicles of America winning the Western frontier is, or has been, the definitive plot line of the American narrative. No other American myth compares. And in this way, Turner's work also probes the formation of the American psyche, as well as pondering deeply into the American soul. Americans breathe this notion of expansion and exhale further expansionist enterprises as their preordained future destiny. The frontier thesis made America tick. Nearly 126 years later, after the publication of Turner's essay, Yale historian Greg Grandin has authored another account of the American frontier experience. The end of the myth, from the frontier to the border wall in the minds of Americans, which won the Pulitzer Prize, has kept a sharp eye towards the American looming and quite different closure of the frontier, the construction of the U.S.-Mexico border wall. Ironically, this closure is geographically situated on the western frontier, exactly where America once sought to expand, and where the expansionist dream and the American character were originally wrought. Grandin's key notion of the endless becoming captures America's inward thrust. That which Turner omits, favors, and aggrandizes, Grandin casts a critical gaze. He contends that America was conceived and always acted on its own expansion inclinations. At a certain point in American history, expansion of itself became a kind of escape valve for America, pent up, unresolved, and conflicted destructive energies. Segregation, racism, outright heathenistic aggression, ethnocentric self-righteousness. These too were American traits, each with its dire consequence. A constant fleeting towards forward allowed the United States to avoid a true reckoning with social problems such as inequality, racism, crime, punishment, and violence, Grandin writes. America was thought of as a process of endless becoming and ceaseless unfurling. Let's now consider the border wall itself. America has shifted from expansionistic land to isolationism and defensive protectivism. Driving energies that once pushed America to conquer the frontier have now been thrown into reverse. This is the turning of America. Thus is the U.S.-Mexican border wall a monument to this conservative momentum. It is being fabricated to keep out the onslaught of immigrants from Mexico, Central America, and South America. The wall is intended to secure America from the violence south of the Rio Grande. Yet in concrete terms, the wall does not stand up to these pressing internal or external challenges. Its construction rises less from actual strategic attempts to resolve problems than from real fear and hate of immigrants and other. It is more a populist ploy, actively negating America's heritage of ingenuity and pragmatism. Is it possible that the Mexican border wall as object and symbol is only an anomaly? The border wall may demark the end of an era, a definitive and permanent shift from the illumination of an open growth to a darkening involution of the American soul. Does the American border wall keep out or fence America in? If so, what happens when America's restless, nervous energy of its endless myth of becoming are fenced in and force driving the wall's construction are turned in on themselves? What occurs when there is no escape valve for America's copious ambition and expansionism, often destructive energies that have always driven this unfolding of the American story? Then America must turn and face its id.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just 4 points and we're done. Once again, I would like to thank you all. Group, you've been amazing. That's been very fantastic 2 days, and I've enjoyed myself. So thank you very much. I know we had a good time. Thank you again for the 2 committees, the scientific and the artistic committees. You've done the work. So the selection was yours, and do expect us to call you back pretty soon, because we really enjoyed working with you. Thank you to the keynotes who put the extra work and were up to the challenge. Thank you to my partners. Thank you, muchas gracias, Hirazema. Fue un placer. Tanmirt and shukran. Saïd, it was a pleasure. Merci l'équipe, vous avez été fantastique. J'ai encore une fois beaucoup de chance de la voir. Je vous aime vraiment beaucoup fort. Publication, second point. Expect maybe an email from us asking, what you think of such and such project. So it will be coming in your emails. Give us a few weeks, though we will have to recover from this. But we sure will. We will reconvene in a year from now in Fez for the Fez agenda on border studies. We are aiming probably at the week of the 18th of May. It may change, but it gives you an idea. Shukran li husni diafa once again, Saïd. It's going to be a pleasure to be with you. Merci beaucoup. Vraiment, ça a été un plaisir. Thank you.